The fluorescent lights of the conference room hummed, a sickly yellow glow that seemed to seep into the very marrow of the room, mirroring the pit that had taken up permanent residence in my stomach. He was there, at the head of the table, a figure I had once admired, now a monument to my naivety. Mr. Henderson, looking every bit the respected innovator, the visionary whose every pronouncement was met with hushed reverence. And my mind, for what felt like the 100th, perhaps even the 1000th, time, replayed the exact moment I had handed him the bound document. It was the culmination of 3 years of my life, my sleepless nights, my every spare cent poured into a dream that now felt like a nightmare. He'd smiled then, a broad, congratulatory sweep of his eyes that, in hindsight, I recognized for the predatory gleam it truly was. It had started so innocuously, as most profound betrayals do, with a subtle shift in the currents, almost imperceptible at first. I was an ideas person, a dreamer in a company that, to be frank, was desperately in need of new life, of a spark to reignite its dying embers. He was the boss, the one with the title, the impressive bank accounts, and, most crucially, the ear of the investors. I'd stumbled upon a genuine breakthrough, a concept so potent it had the potential to revolutionize our entire industry, to pull us from the brink of obsolescence. I had shared it with him, my heart brimming with an almost childish trust, naively believing that a shared success would indeed be just that, shared. He'd been effusive, showering me with a cascade of praise, assuring me with a firm nod that this was, unequivocally, our future. Then came the paperwork. Legal jargon, dense and intimidating, a wall of impenetrable legalese that I, a scientist at heart, found profoundly alien. But he'd explained it away, his voice smooth and reassuring, as standard procedure, a necessary evil to protect our collective intellectual property. He'd even gone so far as to hire a lawyer, a slick, impeccably dressed man named Mr. Davies, who spoke in hushed, confident tones about patent filings and exclusive rights, words that had seemed impossibly grand and important at the time. I'd signed, of course, eager to see my work brought to life, eager to finally feel like I was making a real, tangible impact, a contribution that mattered. I remembered the specific clause, paragraph 7, the one that outlined royalty percentages and licensing agreements, the precise part that should have secured my stake, my rightful place in this burgeoning future. The first hint of trouble was subtle, almost imperceptible, a slow erosion of my involvement that I had initially dismissed as a natural consequence of scaling up. My name, which had been prominent in the early drafts and enthusiastic discussions, began to fade, like an old photograph left too long in the sun. When press releases were finally issued, the language shifted, subtly but decisively, from the inclusive our groundbreaking innovation to the possessive Mr. Henderson's visionary project. He began holding private meetings with the investors, meetings to which I was no longer invited, meetings where he took credit for the concept, for the strategy, for the sheer audacity and brilliance of it all. When I would try, tentatively at first, to bring up my role, the agreed-upon percentage, the explicit agreement outlined in paragraph 7, he would invariably wave it away with a dismissive chuckle, a sound that now echoed with insincerity. "Don't worry about the details," he'd say, his eyes never quite meeting mine, a flicker of annoyance betraying his practiced calm. "It's all being handled." The lawyer, Mr. Davies, became a phantom. My increasingly urgent attempts to contact him were met with polite, disembodied voicemails from a secretary, assurances that Mr. Henderson was handling everything, that my interests were, indeed, being looked after. I was being systematically sidelined, not with a dramatic, explosive confrontation, but with a series of increasingly uncomfortable silences, a slow, suffocating squeeze. The feeling of being a ghost in my own creation was profoundly suffocating. I'd walk past the labs where the prototypes were being meticulously built, see the dedicated engineers working tirelessly on my ideas, and feel a growing hollowness bloom in my chest. They were building his dream, not mine, a phantom limb of a project I could no longer claim. One evening, sifting through the scattered documents on my desk, a task that had become a ritual of desperate hope, I found a copy of the final patent application. My blood ran cold, a visceral shock that stole my breath. There was no mention of me. No co-inventor credit. No acknowledgement whatsoever. It was as if I had never existed, as if my 3 years of relentless effort were nothing more than a fleeting hallucination. The entire patent had been filed under his sole name, a blatant and brutal. L. Erasure. The weight of the betrayal settled on me then, heavy and suffocating, crushing me beneath its immense pressure. It wasn't just about the money, though that was significant, a substantial amount that represented years of sacrifice. It was about the fundamental disrespect, the complete and utter annihilation of my contribution, my intellectual ownership. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet desperation, a descent into a maelstrom of uncertainty. I reread every document, every email, every scrap of communication, searching for a loophole, a mistake, a tiny crack in his carefully constructed facade. I spoke to colleagues, carefully, obliquely, testing the waters, trying to gauge the company's perception of the project and its origin, the accepted narrative. The story was depressingly clear. This was Henderson's brainchild, his solo triumph, his moment of undeniable genius. My carefully crafted paragraph 7, the one that was supposed to be my safeguard, my assurance of financial and professional security, was now just a cruel irony, a phantom limb of a promise that had never materialized. Then, in the depths of my despair, I remembered Mr. Davies. Not the slick, unhelpful lawyer who had handled the initial filing, but his predecessor, the one who had retired the year before. A quiet, meticulous man named Mr. Sterling, renowned throughout the legal community for his unwavering ethics and his almost obsessive tendency to dot every I and cross every T. He had retired, yes, but he still maintained a small private practice, advising former clients on legacy matters, on the intricate details of their professional lives. I found his number through a mutual acquaintance, a former colleague who had spoken highly of Sterling's integrity. The call was brief, almost sterile, a clinical exchange of information. I explained the situation, the patent, the devastating erasure of my name. He listened, his silence punctuated only by the occasional slow exhale, a sign of deep concentration. When I mentioned paragraph 7, he paused, a subtle shift in his measured tone. Paragraph 7, he repeated, his voice thoughtful, tinged with a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher. Yes, I remember that. It was unusually detailed for a standard patent agreement. Mr. Henderson was quite insistent on its inclusion. He agreed to review the original filings, to delve into the archives of his previous work. I sent him everything I had, every scrap of paper, every email, every conversation summary, a digital and physical trail of breadcrumbs leading back to that moment of trust. Days later, he called back. His tone was measured, devoid of overt emotion, which somehow made his words all the more potent, all the more impactful. Your former colleague engaged in creative omission, Mr. Sterling stated calmly, his voice like a precisely calibrated instrument. The patent application as filed is technically accurate in its description of the invention. However, he continued, the pause drawing out the suspense, the agreement outlining your intellectual property rights, specifically as detailed in paragraph 7 of your preliminary contract, was never formally incorporated into the patent's legal framework. It was, in essence, a separate contractual obligation that he appears to have disregarded post-filing. He explained, with a clarity that cut through my confusion, that while the patent itself was secured solely under Henderson's name, the agreement regarding my share, my royalties, my rightful compensation, still existed, documented and undeniably signed by both parties. Henderson had effectively stolen the innovation, but he couldn't erase the contract that bound him. And, critically, Mr. Sterling, in his meticulous thoroughness, had ensured that the language within paragraph 7 was robust, legally binding, and independent of the patent's sole inventor status. He had, in essence, made sure that if the patent ever became profitable, if the invention ever saw the light of day and generated revenue, paragraph 7 would still hold water, even if the patent was solely in Henderson's name. Mr. Sterling hadn't cancelled paragraph 7, he had ensured it was untouchable, buried deep in a separate legal archive, a carefully placed time bomb waiting to detonate at the opportune moment. The next step was not dramatic. There was no grand confrontation, no shouting match, no public scene. It was a quiet, deliberate dissemination of information, a calculated unveiling of the truth. I reached out to the investors, not with accusations, not with emotional pleas, but with cold, hard facts. I sent them copies of the original contract, highlighting paragraph 7, the clause that had been so conveniently overlooked. I included Mr. Sterling's brief, impartial legal opinion, a dispassionate confirmation of the contractual reality. I didn't demand anything. I simply presented the evidence of the agreement that Henderson had so conveniently forgotten, the legal framework that underpinned my claim. The fallout wasn't immediate, but it was profound, a slow burn that eventually consumed the carefully constructed edifice of Henderson's reputation. The humming of the conference room lights seemed to change pitch, the sickly yellow glow now feeling more like an accusation. Henderson, once the picture of confident authority, began to look perpetually harried, a shadow of his former self. The investors, their faces no longer beaming with adoration, were now cool, calculating, their gazes sharp and assessing. Meetings became tense, filled with pointed questions about IP agreements and due diligence, a stark contrast to their previous unquestioning support. Henderson's narrative of sole genius began to fray at the edges, revealing the flawed foundation beneath. Whispers followed him down the hallway, hushed conversations that ceased abruptly when he approached. Colleagues who once sought his approval now avoided his gaze, their former camaraderie replaced by a palpable awkwardness. He never spoke to me directly about it, never acknowledged the seismic shift in our dynamic. The betrayal hung in the air between us, thick and unspoken, a constant, heavy presence. He had taken my patents, yes, but in doing so, he had also inadvertently handed me the leverage to expose his dishonesty, to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The social consequence for him was a slow, quiet ostracism. He was no longer the visionary, he was the man who had tried to get away with theft, the man whose word was now suspect, whose integrity was irrevocably compromised. His reputation, once built on a foundation of innovation and forward thinking, was now irrevocably tarnished by a reputation for ruthless self-interest and blatant deceit. I watched him from a distance, the quiet satisfaction a cool ember in my chest, a warmth that spread through me, dispelling the lingering chill of betrayal. My work continued, away from the glare of his ambition, from the suffocating pressure of his false narrative. I had my name back, not in a patent filing, not in a public declaration, but in the quiet respect of those who knew the truth, and in the profound, internal knowledge that integrity, even when buried under layers of legal jargon and corporate ambition, has a tenacious way of resurfacing. The hum of the lights in the office still felt sickly yellow, a constant reminder of the environment in which I had been wronged, but for me, the air was clearer, the path forward more defined.